Hey, welcome. Today we are diving into something many of us feel like we have a handle on, faith. But the source material for this explainer, well, it comes at it from a totally different angle. It argues that faith isn't just something you have, it's something you do.
So let me just ask you that straight up. What is faith? When you hear that word, what's the first thing that pops into your head? I bet for a lot of us, it's something, internal, something private.
Yeah, we tend to think of faith as a belief, an opinion, maybe a really strong feeling. It's all stuff that's happening inside our own heads. But what if that's just like half the picture?
The text we're getting into today completely flips that script. It makes the case that true biblical faith, it's not passive at all. In fact, we see it in the real-world decisions people made when the pressure was on. The whole big idea is this: faith is an action. Okay, let's dive into this. The source argues that faith isn't a noun just sitting there. It's a verb. It's an action word. It moves, it chooses, it obeys. And to really see what that looks like, we're going to explore two pretty fascinating case studies.
All right, first up, Moses. A total giant of the faith, right? But the wild thing is, the story of his faith, it actually starts before he could even talk, with the incredible, courageous actions of his parents.
So check this out. This slide really breaks down the choice they had. On one side, you've got Pharaoh, literally the most powerful person on the planet who had ordered all Hebrew baby boys to be killed. Just plain old fear would tell you to obey. But Moses' parents, they were driven by a different kind of fear, a deep, reverential respect for God. And that faith, it wasn't just a feeling. It made them do something, defy a king to save their son. And you know what? That same act of faith was clearly passed down to Moses, because when he grew up, he had literally everything you could want. The status, the power, the security of being Egyptian royalty. He was at the very top. And his faith led him to say no thanks to all of it. That's just wild, isn't it? It just makes you stop and ask, why would anybody in their right mind walk away from all of that? What could possibly be worth more?
Well, the source we're looking at gives us the answer right here. It was a deliberate choice. Faith put two options on the scale and actively chose what looked like a really bad deal, suffering, over what looked like a good time. It's all that all those perks in Egypt, they were temporary, they were fleeting, and they came at a cost.
And this slide just lays it out so clearly. On one side, the treasures of Egypt. On the other, the reproach of Christ. What that really means is choosing to identify with God and his people, even if the rest of the world thinks you're crazy for it. So faith does the math. It looks at what the world is offering and decides, nope, not worth it. And it chooses a totally different path. So what's the secret sauce here? How could he possibly make that choice? It's because faith has a completely different timeline. It's not just focused on right now. The source says Moses was looking to the reward. His actions were all based on a future that he was absolutely sure about. And this right here, this is the key. He kept going. He endured. How? By seeing him who is invisible. Wow. Just think about that for a second. Faith isn't about being blind. It's about having a different kind of sight.
Let's just let that sink in. Faith sees what our physical eyes can't see. It's like having a superpower. You see the real reality, God's reality, and you act based on that.
And once you see that reality, it leads straight to obedience. Faith didn't just have a general feeling that God would rescue Israel from that final plague. No, it followed the specific, kind of strange, instruction to put blood on the doorposts. See, faith doesn't just wing it. It acts on these specific details God gives. And all of this leads to one of the most incredible moments you can imagine. You've got the Israelite people with a sea in front of them and Pharaoh's army closing in behind, and they step into the water. That's the thing about this kind of faith. It takes a step forward even when, especially when, you can't see the path ahead. Okay, so that's the prince. Now for our second story, and it's a total contrast. It's awesome. If faith works for royalty in Egypt, what about for someone on the complete opposite end of the spectrum? Let's take a look at the surprising case of Rahab.
Just look at a resume, so to speak. Rahab was a Canaanite, an enemy of Israel. She was a prostitute, an outcast in her own culture. By basically every standard, she was an outsider, a sinner. She was the last person you'd expect to see in a story about faith.
So why is she a hero of faith? Simple. Her faith was in action. She heard about what God had done, and she made a decision. She actively turned her back on her entire world, her people, her city, her own past, and took the incredibly dangerous step of siding with God's people by hiding those spies.
So there you have it, a prince and a prostitute, a leader and an outcast. What happens when you put their stories together? What do they show us about what this active faith is really made of?
So, okay, when we lay these two stories side by side, we start to see the DNA of this active faith. First, it fears God more than any human power, like Moses' parents did with Pharaoh. It actively chooses God's path over all the world's treasures. It looks ahead to a future reward, and that changes everything. It obeys God's specific instructions, like with the Passover. It steps out in courage when the way forward is totally unclear, like walking into the Red Sea. And finally, it joins the community of God's people, just like Rahab did. It's a complete, all-in, decisive commitment.
But here's the thing. These aren't just cool historical stories. The source text makes it really clear that they're all pointing forward to someone much, much greater.
And that ultimate example of active faith? Well, that's Jesus Christ. He's presented as the true and better Moses. He didn't just leave a palace in Egypt. He left the glory of heaven itself. He endured reproach and led his people not just through a sea, but through death itself into eternal life. And that right there brings this whole thing right into our lives today. The call in these stories is a call to us. We're called to have that same kind of active, moving, choosing faith, not just to hold an idea in our minds, but to actually act on that belief in the real world.
So we end up back where we started. But now the question is a little different. It's not just, what do you believe? It's based on what you believe, what will your faith do? Thanks so much for joining me for this.